I just recently made a review of the Homestuck pilot. Importantly, for that review, I specifically wanted to watch it without having read any of the original comic. A concept that really seemed to trip up a whole lot of people. Listen, the point of a new adaptation is literally to sell the idea to new audience members. The best case scenario is that a lot of people check it out who haven't already read the source material, because it's intended to bring in more new folks into the franchise with a wider reach. So all those comments sneering and saying, well, you should have read the comic first, you don't get to have an opinion, is antithetical towards the concept of the pilot being a success. It's a pilot. It's not like it drops us into the middle of the story or anything. It's the beginning, the literal introduction. If an adaptation can't properly introduce new viewers to the important world, characters, or story elements, then it's just a failure of an adaptation. As someone who had not read the comic, I did not like the animated pilot. And believe it or not, having a bunch of, well, trolls screeching at me that I should have read the comic first actually did not do much to really entice me to bother engaging with the franchise or fandom anymore. However, fortunately, there are some very kind and welcoming members of the Homestuck fanspace who did encourage me to check out the comic. Now, I haven't finished reading it yet. I've only made it to the end of Act 2, though I'm certain there's going to be commenters on this video disregarding anything I have to say because, well, you should have finished the whole thing first. Which, real talk, it's an insane ask to have to read the whole comic as a prerequisite to watch a single 11-minute long pilot. Not only is the comic regularly inaccessible for people, even as of writing this now, the official website only has the first 4-ish arcs posted, and physical copies of the comics can be over $100. And dedicating yourself to the comic means you're reading over 8,000 pages. I've only made it to the end of Arc 2, and that alone took me 7 hours, but now that I have read a little bit of the comic, at least enough to compare to the animated pilot, I actually realize my initial review was wrong. It's not bad. It's actually so much worse than I thought. Holy guacamole, this is a terrible adaptation. Important characterization is missing, the charm of the original story is gone, Dave, friggin' everything they've done to Dave. So I'm back for round 2, so strap in, Homestuck fans. I'm going back over the pilot again. The duality of someone who has and has not read the comic. Let's go. So, starting us out right away with the desert and the wayward vagabond is a neat way to hint towards the fact there's going to be a lot more to the story than just the kids sitting around playing a video game. However, I don't like how the mayor of Cantown is shown acting as a controller for John right away. One of Homestuck's most unique details is how it plays around with whose point of view we're in. For the first arc, you play as John, described to you in the second person. The wayward vagabond doesn't start interacting with John until Act 2 starts, and they never have full control over what John does. The vagabond acts more like an omnipotent suggestion rather than as a player who can control anything John is doing. In fact, John regularly disregards what the vagabond tells him to do, especially shown when he adamantly denies eating Nana's cookies. Having the vagabond playing John's life like a game takes away John's agency as a character. John is implied to be incapable of even sorting his inventory, or even just putting the game into his computer. On top of that, it muddies the aspect of how, once they actually start playing Spurb, the main feature of it is that Rose, at least her at first, can literally rearrange and move things around John's house. She controls the cursor that plays his house like a game of Sims. So giving the vagabond a cursor on top of that just takes away from that important distinction. The different inventory setups, in-universe gameplay mechanics, and the limitations of who can do what at any point in time is incredibly crucial towards the stakes of the story, and is one of the most interesting things that makes Homestuck stand out from other similar concepts. In my first video, I compared it to Scott Pilgrim, And yeah, when it's just surface level video game references, they are kind of comparable. But once you get into the nitty-gritty of how the different characters are actually playing the game, that comparison gets thrown out the window. And it's a shame that the pilot instead diminishes that uniqueness for the sake of fan service, I guess. Because in all honesty, we shouldn't be seeing the wayward vagabond at all this early in the story, but they also just couldn't wait to show off the trolls either, and those don't drop until like Act 5-ish. Yeah, when your pilot is just low-hanging fruit for fan service, you would think reading the comic would be a requirement to watch it. Now, an important aspect about the pilot is that it is an actual pilot. We've kind of gotten away from how pilots are meant to work because a lot of indie shows have sort of turned their pilots into soft episode 1 or episode 0, looking at you two in particular for this. This pilot is more like a real pilot, a proof of concept, a pitch, a thing to show off what's in store and how they could tell their larger story. It's understandable certain things would be inconsistent for the sake of showing off the concept to the larger world. Like, Serenity isn't stuck in amber, or Rose goes running out of her room with her laptop even though the power hasn't gone out yet. Things like that, where it's not following the pace of the story because it's prioritizing showing what it could look like if the true adaptation gets that far. So I'm not going to fault the pilot for things like that. In my original review, I called John's posters blurry nightmarescapes, and they are. I see that it's meant to avoid having copyrighted material like how he has in the comic. I wish they had instead made them parodied versions of the movies, though. The personality of the kids' rooms is a pretty big element for initially showing us who they are as characters. And while yeah, the narrator mentions John likes bad movies, actually seeing the collection of subpar film posters highlights what kind of movies he's talking about. And this kind of dominoes into my next point. The narrator should have been way more active.
A great tool for storing, combining, and stacking items.
The comic has such a specific way with words that paints a perfect picture of each character. Whether you're with Rose, Dave, John, or whoever, the vocabulary and personality on display changes ever so subtly. The way things are described by the narrator is such a massive aspect of the charm of the game. Not only does the unique wording give it its own distinct style, but without the narrator here, we miss out on a lot of characterization for John. The narrator doesn't just describe what we see in the setting, they describe John's thoughts and feelings towards whatever he's interacting with. It's unfortunately one of the hardest elements from the comic to try to adapt to a medium that doesn't involve reading a crap ton of words, but they have a narrator. And while I don't think the narrator should be droning on and on and on, or have John do an endless internal monologue either, I also think that the pilot is missing a lot of the fun from the comic without these descriptions. I mentioned before that I think their designs are boring, and they are. I am very charmed by their small potato proportions from the comic. It's unique, instantly recognizable, and this style for the pilot feels samey. Like, we've seen this a million times. But on top of that, the actual boring part is the fact they all four of them have the same cookie-cutter body types as each other, the same height, same width, yawn, Snoresville. Personally, I perceive John as being on the shorter and wider side. I think the model they use for the pilot would best fit Dave. Rose, I think, would be the shortest and be much more thick compared to the others. And Jade, I think, would be tallest and rather beanpole-esque. But you know, any other combo of height and size would be just much more interesting than this. John's little buck teeth aren't prominent enough. Again, it's just one of Homestuck's most defining features for visual design, and it's gone for the sake of looking like run-of-the-mill and squeaky corporate clean.
And aspiring to be a magician.
So why don't they mention his love of comedy? You know, John's most defining feature? The fact John, his father, and his grandmother are all devoted to comedy is a super important element of their family dynamic. They have a friggin' humor meter that goes up and down when they successfully pull pranks on each other. So much of John's characterization comes from his love for Sassaker's comedy book. The reason he has all these weird, goofy things like the fake arms and his disguise is because it's a part of his aspiring to be a funny jokester. But they don't mention that at all here. They instead just say aspiring magician, which is not the same thing. And it makes his inventory confusing too. When I watched the pilot, I thought these purple things were pills, like Tylenol or something. When they exploded at the end of the strife, I thought that was just for visual pizzazz. After all, they're flying through the air and launching a billion cakes at each other. Pill explosion from impact doesn't sound too far-fetched. But no! They're actually supposed to be smoke pellets. Without the narrator or John explaining things, and without the context that John has a lot of gag items laying around for jokes, it makes it impossible to discern what these pellets actually are. John comes across as this miserable, whiny dork, whereas that kid who wants to have goofs and japes. On top of that, it makes his fight with his dad way different. In the context of the comic, it's made clear Dad pulls out a pie tin to do a classic pie to the face gag. Here, when Dad launches cakes and pies into John, it comes across like he's literally beating his child, like he's actually trying to hurt and attack him. Without the context of the family's history of comedy, the vibe of the encounter is completely wrong. Also, the strife sections in the game are meant to be more metaphorical. Don't get me wrong, Homestuck does do a lot of crazy off-the-wall things, but a pretty clear aspect of John and Rose as characters is that they don't like their parents and perceive any interaction with them as some sort of conflict. They're not actually fighting them with their hammer and knitting needles. It's more in their heads, implied by how the music suddenly cuts out and the parents seemingly just jump to doing some mundane thing around the house. So the fact the strife fight is played so literally in the pilot misses the whole point, and I can't convince myself it was all metaphorical because there's a literal hole in the floor of John's bedroom as a part of the aftermath of the fight.
Or you risk losing the item at the bottom of your capsule.
There are certain things I understand why they got cut. John fiddling around with his inventory, and all the other characters too for that matter, could be classified as filler. However, keeping track of what's in his inventory and what's going to pop out at the end is a pretty important aspect of the struggles he faces in the story. He can only interact with the top card, so he can't actually use any of the stuff in the middle of his inventory without pushing it out first, which most becomes important when his friends are trying to contact him via his PDA. A lot of the game is done through chat logs, and they've abandoned that idea to instead make it more like a phone call between them. I understand why they chose this decision, having John stand in one spot typing for minutes on end just to wander around by himself with no one to interact with doesn't exactly seem like a thrilling pace for a visual medium. Just like the narrator, unfortunately, this is one of the hardest things to try to adapt from Homestuck. There are multiple crucial times in the story when John can't see what his friends are trying to tell him. It's a natural part of the tension building as the plot progresses. I'm sure they could figure out a way to keep that important plot aspect and incorporate it into their dialogue being phone calls, but it's still disappointing how the pilot kinda brushes that element along with the inventory management aside. And you might be like, oh, but it's just, the pilot's supposed to just be fun. In my mind, the inventory management is the fun part.
Well, joke's on you. I fucking love hammers.
Some dialogue is lifted straight from the comic, sometimes word for word even, but there's also plenty of times where it's new, like this line from John. And honestly, a lot of Dave's dialogue is like that too. Don't worry, we'll get to Dave. The new dialogue isn't bad in theory, but it doesn't sound quite right. I don't know what it is. Maybe it feels too fan servicey. Maybe the dialogue is too modern.
Let's not pretend you're immune to his aura.
Like, I don't remember teens saying people had aura back in 2009. Homestuck is very much a time capsule for the years it was published in, so these slight tips into modernized vocabulary just kind of feel off in the back of my mind.
Okay, look. I'm not saying bro is hard on the eyes or anything.
One downside to having their conversations happen at the same time as John moving around his house is it means their conversations sorta take our attention away from the important things we're seeing. John doesn't stop to really set up the Harlequin doll or Nana in this scene, both of which are kinda really important elements for the future of the story, but their introduction here gets pushed into the background so John can focus on talking to Rose. I feel like John does too many action roles. The fact John doesn't seem like the kind of guy to do combat is part of the suspense and fun of watching him fighting through Spurb as the player character. I guess they made him action dodge a bunch of stuff here, so then when the strife happens, his crazy combat choreography doesn't feel like it comes out of nowhere, but I don't know. I like him more when he's just a regular kid. Also, the only one who does cool action roles should be Rose with her sweet youth role. Yeah.
Dude, did you get the title drop yet?
What?
Okay, it's time to tackle Dave. First, this whole title drop bit is so dumb. Not only does it take forever, it's not funny or entertaining, but the way Dave talks about it makes it seem like it's supposed to be important, but then literally nothing happens with it. It was just an odd, roundabout excuse to get John to look at the sky and notice a meteor. Second, this is not Dave.
Gave me a hella jolt of protag syndrome. Not that I'ma be the hero of this bitch. That's all you, bestie.
This is Dave. You notice how there's no smile? Actually, there's no emotion at all, because that's the whole point. Dave tries excruciatingly hard to be as insincere as possible. He only claims to enjoy things ironically in an attempt to mirror his brother's perception of coolness. He is an edgelord who doesn't take anything seriously and undermines everyone's passions to further emotionally distance himself from being perceived as anything other than a stoic badass. He does not show any genuine interest in anything or anyone. So how the heck did they sit down to write this pilot and went, oh yeah, we can't forget to make Dave a super energetic, chipper, Nickelodeon cartoon character-esque ball of sunshine, laughs, and chill vibes. Like, omitting John's love for comedy is one thing, at least he still embodies his other attributes here, but Dave is the literal antithesis of his comic counterpart. It's weird, it's less interesting in the pilot, and makes the group of Spurb friends feel less rounded out and distinct from each other. To transition away from that dumb nitpick time, John's inventory was supposed to get another window after the captcha log got pushed out of the order, but they didn't do that. It's still in the captcha log, and instead it just looks like John magically got another inventory slot for no reason. Like, they really didn't care about the inventory gimmick here, did they? I know the pilot is just a proof of concept, but it's still disappointing that it ends right before the story actually starts happening. Them playing Spurb is the whole interesting thing that happens in the story after all. But anyways, now that I've gone over this pilot twice over, I can confirm that I think it is a terrible adaptation. Both as a new viewer to the franchise and as someone who's reading the comic, it's missing a lot of the charm of the original comic's dialogue, visuals, humor, and most importantly, its characterization. As a new viewer, it feels boring and slow and does a bad job establishing important details for the world, and the characters come across as bland. As a reader of the comic, it feels like it's running past all the smaller, more interesting elements that add important nuance that makes Homestuck so stand out. It seems to misunderstand entire plot beats and entire character personalities. The visuals, while technically more impressive than MS Paint drawings, have a lot less uniqueness and charm, making the pilot feel watered down and run-of-the-mill. They prioritize moments of fan service, even if it doesn't really match the tone or setting, and makes new viewers feel like they're missing out. It's really bad. I do not like it. The only good thing I can say about the Homestuck pilot is that it made me interested enough to read the original comic. That is super interesting and a lot of fun, and I'm glad I'm reading it. So at least there's that. Shout out to my $10 patrons, you're all amazing. Andrew, Valhalla Knight, Chamomile, Classy Critic, Genital War Thunder, Jake, Amber, Scaring Crows, Not All That Evil, Holly, Messiah, Jacob, Ben's Sketchbook, Rain, Trash, Wild Pilot, Josh, Twisty, Juan, Bunkin' Duncan, Hoodie Angel, Ranger, Sean, Primaroon, Overhypin, Lavaros, Knight, Plague, Tyrene, Thanos, Pandemonium, Peter, Agiri, Shahid, Eden, The Eliza, Doki Poki, Moon of Blues, Spencer, Bargus Blue, Cage the Mage, Zappy, Wolfgang, Dima, Philip, and Mr. Mailman. So yeah, what did you think? I've now covered it twice now. I think at this point, the amount of time I've spent talking about it is double the length of the actual pilot. What do you think? Good or bad or whatever? If you're new to the series, what do you think? If you're an old reader, like if you've read it before, what do you think? Now that I've read it and you've seen my perspective change with and without having the context of the comic, does that do anything for you? Is it interesting? Are you more compelled to read the comic now too? Any other thoughts and opinions? Let me know in the comments below. I would love to see them. Hopefully they're not as trolly as last time. And I'll see you in the next one. Bye bye.